I've had a number of people asking me about learning Arabic, so I'm making this video to give some insight into why you should learn Arabic, especially as a Muslim, and what I've done to get where I am so far, which, given the amount of time I've been learning Arabic, isn't particularly good, but maybe some of the things I've got to say will help other people. So first of all, why should we learn Arabic? Well, as a Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Yusuf, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. We have sent it down as an Arabic Quran so that you may understand. So it's explicitly mentioned in the Quran about the Arabic being a key to understanding the Quran. When I first started learning Arabic, especially grammar, I used to ask, why do I need to learn grammar? This is quite complicated. And someone gave me the example of the following ayah in the Quran. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءُ, which is in Surah Fatir, ayah 28. The ones that fear Allah from amongst His slaves are those who have knowledge, al-ulama. Now, if we look at what we call the tashkil, or where do we put the fatha, which is that sound, the kasra, which is the e sound, and the dhamma, which is the u sound. If we look at where we put these, or these are put in this ayah, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ. So the lafz al-jalala, what is referred to as the word that refers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or lafz al-jalala, is mansub, it has the fatha at the end of the word, which means that it is the direct object, or the maf'ulun bih. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. So عِبَادِهِ, or those who are subservient, is what we call majroor, or has a kasra. So it's majroor because of the min, and the word such as min and fi and illa, these make the words that come after them what we call majroor. It's a grammatical tense, and we know that because of the tashkil, because of this kasra. Al-ulama'u, so this is marfu'. This is the doer of the verb, and the verb is of course yakhsh or khasha, khashya, the ones that fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So without this understanding of the Arabic grammar, we can completely misunderstand this verse. And this is a very, very basic, what is maf'ulun bihi, what is majroor, what is fa'il, what is fi'l. This is very, very basic Arabic grammar. So this is kind of one of the reasons why we would want to understand the Arabic language, so that we can understand what's in the Quran properly. Just before we get started, I want to also mention something that Ibn Taymiyyah said, which is, moreover, the Arabic language itself is from the religion, and learning it is obligatory. Understanding the Quran and Sunnah is an obligation, and this is not possible except through the Arabic language. And if an obligation cannot be achieved through something, then that thing itself becomes an obligation. If you want to attain a deep understanding of the Quran, if you study the Quran, you want to understand it properly, then how can you rely on someone else's translation? There are so many translations of the meanings of the Quran, and in my personal experience, learning the Arabic language and then reflecting on the meanings of the Quran that you can reflect on at that stage you're at is an entirely different experience than reading a translation. Something very difficult to explain to anyone that, unless you actually spend the time to learn the language. I've got a quote here on my wall, which is attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i, who said, if you cannot bear the fatigue of learning, then you will face the bitterness of ignorance. So learning is difficult. It takes a lot of patience, and it's tiring, but the fruits of learning are extremely sweet. What if you want to actually learn Arabic and you're not in an Arabic speaking country? Or you are in an Arabic speaking country but nobody wants to speak to you in Arabic, which is kind of the case here in Kuwait. Everyone wants to speak English to me, so it can become very difficult, but so I'll give you some tips on that. Let me take you from the beginning, when I first started learning Arabic. This was back when I was in the UK, in Basingstoke, and I'd already learnt what we call the makharij, how to pronounce the Arabic characters, alif, ba, ta, tha, etc. The most difficult ones I found were like ha and ain and dha. These were quite difficult initially, but this for me, the first thing I wanted to learn was how to pronounce the characters of the Arabic alphabet correctly, so that when I constructed the words, that they would also come out properly. And this is how, for example, in Indonesia, I haven't seen that many other, I haven't been exposed to that many other learning methods, but I'm sure they're pretty similar. In Indonesia, for example, that's what they do when they're teaching children the Quran. They'll teach how to first pronounce the alphabet correctly, then how to assimilate the letters, and then, in terms of tajweed and reciting the Quran, what happens if this letter meets that letter, and all of the different possibilities, so that you can pronounce everything correctly once you get to the Quran. But if you're just learning the Arabic language, let's say you're not a Muslim, you just want to learn the Arabic language, you need to learn how to pronounce the letters properly. That would be my suggestion in the first instance. Following on from that, like I said, in Basingstoke, I had a teacher, an Egyptian doctor who was studying medicine in the UK, Dr. Muhammad. And if you're watching this, Barakallahu Feek, Dr. Muhammad, Jazakallah Khair. And we studied from this course, the famous Medina Arabic course by Dr. Abdurrahim V. Abdurrahim, Jazahullah Khairan wa Hafidhullah. There's three books in this series. There's a second one, and you can see the state of it. It's falling apart because my wife and I have used it so much. So we started with this course, but some of the ulama have said, for example, Al-Ajrumiyyah is the best one to start with. I mean, I have this book. This is the explanation by Sheikh Uthaymeen. This is another book written. It's called Al-Hiwar fi Sharh Al-Ajrumiyyah, which means a discussion in the explanation of Al-Ajrumiyyah. Ajrumiyyah is like a foundational text in Arabic grammar, but if maybe like what I did, I used this book, Complete Arabic, to initially get a small vocabulary going and learn how to pronounce some words. But the best thing you can do is get a teacher, agree on a text that you want to start with. Here's another one, for example, which is called another famous course, Al-Arabiyya Bayna Yadayk. This is the second book. It's a very, very good course. They all come from slightly different angles. So I started with Dr. Muhammad, and we went, page by page, and we asked, and he wasn't really a teacher of the Arabic language, but mashallah, I benefited a lot from him. Then when I moved to the Middle East, I started discussing with people, trying to grow my vocabulary. But it was okay, because I wasn't really using too much grammar and people would understand. But in terms of learning the Quran and understanding the Quran, I was missing out, and that's where books like Ajrumiyyah are extremely important, because they give you the fundamentals. As I said, you need to understand why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the tashkil as they are. The fatha, kasra, dhamma, these are important. They show you which word is connected to which verb, and how the sentences are connected to each other, and so on and so forth. It's very important, especially for Quran and Hadith, or the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I used to keep on talking to people. I used to keep on discussing, trying to practice my Arabic, off and on for many, many years, until I moved to Oman. And I was over in Oman with a group of, I met up with a group of Indonesian people. My wife's from Indonesia, so it was really good to meet up with them, and they all wanted to learn Arabic. They had a teacher called Ustad Isnain, Indonesian Arabic teacher who's living in Qatar, and we started again the Medina books with him. I think when I started, they were just finishing the first book, and I'd reached kind of 7 or 8 chapters into the second book, but years before that, so it was a good place to start. And the way he taught us was with what we call i'rab. So you would have to he'd give you a sentence, for example, al-baytu qadimun, so the house is old, and then he'd ask us, so what's the grammatical breakdown of this sentence? So we'd say البيت مبتدأ مرفوع بالابتداء وعلامة رفعه ضمة ظاهرة على آخره لأنه اسم مفرد. And قديم would be خبر المبتدأ مرفوع وعلامة رفعه ضمة ظاهرة على آخره لأنه اسم مفرد. This is the most basic Arab. So this would explain the first word. Al-Bayt is the mubtada at the start of the sentence. And every mubtada has to have a khabar. And qadimun is the khabar, or what completes the mubtada. And this is what we call a jumla ismiya, or like a non-verbal sentence, a sentence which doesn't have a verb kind of that starts, doesn't start with a verb. Just as an example. So we started there with Ustad Isnain, and he would teach us like this as we moved on. So you'd move to inna, and then akhwataha, so inna and her sisters, and then you'd move on to the af'al, the verbs, so the past tense verbs, and so on and so on. We progressed like this, and the various different rulings for kana and fi'l mudari'. Fi'l mudari' starts to get a bit more complicated because you have different types of endings of the verbs. It's like a standard progression through the language. What I found very useful was books like this, Arabic verbs. As you get deeper into the language, you really need to understand what's the past and present tense. If I make this, what's the masdar, or the verbal noun of each verb, the different types of verb and the templates of the verb, the different forms, and what each form typically means. There are also very good applications you can download. One of the ones which I found the most useful is called Cave. I'll put a picture of it up in the corner here, the application icon. I'll mention it in the description below. Very, very useful verb conjugation device. Then you have books like النحو الواضح, which are kind of a more modern approach to explaining concepts that you'd come across in al-Ajrumiyyah. And then the pinnacle would be something like this, Alfiya ibn Malik. Honestly, I haven't got there yet. This is 1,000 lines of written by Imam Malik on the grammar. And if you look, for example, at the advice of Sheikh Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, may Allah be pleased with him, have mercy on him. He mentioned that you should start with memorizing the Quran as much as you can, and then studying the Arabic language. And then he mentioned in studying the Arabic language, start with something like Ajrumiyyah, which is a basic grammatical introduction, then move on to Alfiya Imam Malik, memorizing it and understanding it. So all of this is with a teacher, of course. The best thing to do is to have a teacher. What I'm doing right now is I stayed with Ustad Isnan as long as I could. What you typically find with Arabic is, because it's quite difficult to stay consistent for a lot of people, people tend to drop off, find excuses not to join the class, and that causes problems for the rest of the class. Like I just started an Arabic course here in Kuwait, and we started off with a lot more people than we have now. It's very normal for the class to just drop because it becomes too difficult, which is why I would always advise to get on a paid class, a good paid course, because when people spend their own money for something, they tend to want to work harder at achieving it. So you might be able to see this big book here behind me. التفاصيل في إعراب آيات التنزيل. So this is a 17 or 16 volume set, written here in Kuwait by a group of scholars that they've broken down every single letter in the Quran in its context, of course. They give us the explanation of those of the words in the Quran. So it's not so much a tafsir, like an exegesis, but it's an explanation of the grammar of each word in the Quran. It's at my level now, I'll be honest with you, probably about 60% of it is accessible to me. The remainder is Arabic grammatical rules that I haven't yet come across, or a little bit advanced for me. I'd honestly say that it's taken me far too long to get to where I am today. My level is medium at best, and I would say if someone was really, really dedicated, starting from scratch, you could probably get through all 3 Medina books inside of a year, if you had a good teacher and you were doing it intensely, like almost every day. So once you finish the Medina books, you should be able to read most of the Quran and understand, and many hadith. So this would be a really good place to start, and then you can maybe move on to Ajrumiyyah. Personally, I wouldn't advise studying too many books at once. I've spread myself a little bit thin over the years. There's a lot of material available online. For example, this book, Sharh al-Ajrumiyyah, Fadilat al-Shaykh Al-Alama Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen. This book, you can access some of the lectures that were recorded, or probably most of the lectures that were recorded, of him explaining Al-Ajrumiyyah. So that's accessible to anyone anywhere in the world as an internet connection. Anyway, before we go, I'll show you some snapshots of my personal notes in my book here, which I've been using to learn Arabic, just to show you the sort of level of notes that we take. And my advice would be, and subhanAllah, my wife's so much better than I am, my advice would be take notes during the class, and then have another book where you write everything down in a much neater form, so that you can come back to it and refer back to it. Do this consistently. Don't make any excuses for missing it. Do it consistently, and you'll have a reference book or a series of reference books you can go back to and look at for every single principle, qaida. Even if you miss one, you'll regret it, because as you learn the qawaid, the principles, you'll be expected to continue to use them and remember them. And if you don't have them written down, because there's a lot of them, there's a lot of exceptions to the rules depending on the grammatical context, you'll need to have those notes. The notes are very important, so make them. My advice would again be to take your notes in the class, rough notes, whatever it is. Have another book for your neat notes, because if you go through what you've learnt in the class afterwards and write them down neatly, this will, what they call in Indonesian, ikat ilmunya. It's going to tie the knowledge into your mind. The other thing that's very important, and I'm quite honestly terrible at, but I'm advising you with what I've learned. So in these books you'll get like an exercise, so there'll be a discussion, a hiwar, and then after the hiwar you'll have something called tamarin, which is like the exercises. Do every single exercise, write every single exercise down and complete every single exercise. Like in the Medina books, there can be a lot, 17, 18, 20 exercises per chapter, but believe me, if you do every single exercise, you understand what you're doing, by the end of this chapter you'll have commanded it, inshallah. So yeah, at the end of this I'll give you just a quick tour of some of my notes, and then just please let me know if there's any other information you want. Bit of a long video, but hopefully beneficial, inshallah. Please let me know what you think, if I've made any mistakes, any comments, and see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, so here we're just going through the fi'l madi. Same with this one, it's different form of the fi'l madi. And this is the fi'l sahih al-akhir. Just taking notes there on that one, and the amthal al-khamsa. Hope that helps.